Welcome to the Think Deeper podcast presented by Focus Press. I'm one of your hosts, Jack Wilkie, joined as always by my brother Joe Wilkie and Will Harrod. We have a, challenging episode today.
We've used that one, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, we've used that one. We got to get our thesaurus.
An amazing
Eye-opening
episode. Let's just say
eye-opening. How's that?
An eye-opening episode. I like that.
That's
Let's
good.
go with that. Then again, people are listening, so it's ear-opening. I don't know. We'll go with eye-opening. Again, we've been saying this for a while. Not much to tell you about this time, but we've got Lads to Leaders Nashville coming up. We will be there with a booth. I know a lot of families come through for that, so come say hello to us. Let us know you're a deep thinker. In fact, Will, tell them what we're doing one more time.
Yeah, so drawing, we've got some Think Deeper merchandise. We've got those cups, I guess they're called thermoses or whatever, that keep your drink cold or hot. We've got some Think Deeper bags and stickers and things, and you get a free book of your choice if you win the drawing. But you have to let us know that you're a deep thinker, and you got to take a selfie with us, and we'll put your name in there, and then you can get a free book of your choice and all the Think Deeper merch that we've got that we're going to have there. So, yeah, come let us know that you're a deep thinker. We'd love to meet you.
There you go. All right. I also want to just remind you about the Focus Press Podcast Network. You only get an hour of us every week on Think Deeper. If that's not enough for you, Joe and Will every Tuesday with the Godly Young Men, the gym podcast. Check that out, especially if you have any young men in your family. Joe has Get Out of Porn every Friday, just new episodes every week, giving tips on how to handle that struggle. And Who Let the Dogma Out, my other theology podcast, is working its way back. We should be back sooner than later, and so subscribe to that feed, catch up. There's 12 episodes from Season 1. Season 2 will be on the way soon, so all kinds of content, free stuff every single week, so be sure to go check that out. And we don't have anything else to tell you about, so Joe, tell us what this eye-opening episode is going to cover.
Yeah, so we have been talking about this behind the scenes and off air for a long time, and we've covered some things somewhat similar to it, I would say, but not exactly that. And that's the idea of extending or extended adolescence. Something I've noticed just looking around, paying attention, and I don't know if you guys noticed this as well. Maybe our listeners have. You look at the average college kid or kid that's heading into college these days. They look really young to me. And I can't say much. I got a ridiculous baby face. And so I know that I look very young, but I feel like we are struggling with the idea of adulting, quote unquote, as people might say, getting into our adulthood. And we've extended adolescence. And it's not just the facial kind of goes along with what we wanted to discuss today, which is more of the mindset. It's more of the emotional place where we're at, where you have kids, young kids that stay young. So they go off to college, and then they get done with college, and then maybe they're starting family, maybe not. I mean, most of the time they're not. You're hitting 24, 25, kind of starting careers, and they're just kids. They've extended that adolescence where they are still liking all of the same things. They're still doing all of the same things. They've never really come into adulthood. And some of the trends that you see this in is like, again, consider Disney Channel shows. I don't watch Disney. We boycotted Disney. I would say, nobody else needs to watch those as well. At the same time, you go from maybe shows that Jack, you and I watched growing up, and obviously I was the youngest in the family, so we watched, throwbacks like The Jersey, if anybody remembers things like that, famous Jet Jackson. And it was these shows where the kids were a little bit older, right? And it was about kind of growing up and dealing with adulthood and some major themes of, okay, what does it mean to grow up and get out of adolescence and to become an adult in real life? Whereas as you get older, you get like Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and then you get, Hannah Montana, and I'm really dating myself because I don't know any of the Disney shows these days, but at the same time, when you look, a lot of stupid things, a lot of like just the gag reels, so to speak, where it's the laugh track, and it's just dumb. And there's no struggle with any of the adult concepts or what it means to kind of come into adulthood. It's all about just remaining a kid. Are you guys seeing, and I don't know if I'm setting this up fully the way that we're going to get into like a huge discussion on the war on childhood versus adulthood, why this is the case, why we have extended adolescence and kids are struggling to grow up into adulthood. But fellas, what are you seeing? And are you seeing that as well? I guess is what I'd ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that we started, Jack referenced at the beginning of the episode, the Godly Young Men podcast, is because we saw this specifically with young men. I think it obviously can translate across the sexes as far as guys and girls, but man, specifically with young men, one of the things we talked about in our promotional video for the Gym podcast is you think about just 50 or 60 years ago, what young men, and when we say young men, I'm talking 14, 15, 16-year-olds, were doing with their lives. They were starting businesses, they were going off to fight wars, doing all of these things that we would look at now and, man, we're not going to expect our 14, 15, 16-year-olds to do any of those things. In fact, even our definition of quote-unquote young people has changed. You think about these, again, people in college, maybe just fresh out of college in their early 20s. A lot of times people still refer to them as, oh, they're just kids. They're so young, they're just kids. Man, back 40, 50, 60 years ago, that wasn't the case. When you hit a certain age and when you started taking on certain levels of responsibility, you were no longer considered a kid. You were considered a man. You were considered a woman. And we have hit around this topic quite a bit. We're 60-plus episodes in to Think Deeper, the new version of Think Deeper as the one that started in 2021. And we haven't devoted a full episode to this, but it's one of those things that we felt the need to because we're seeing it more and more. And the way that I would put it, and then Jack, I'll hand it back to you to kind of speak more on this, emotional immaturity. It's not just that they're not taking the full levels of responsibility. It's not just that they're not prioritizing starting families and really going out and conquering. It's that even the ones that maybe have started their families or are into their career, there's just an immaturity, an emotional immaturity. Certainly, I would say a spiritual immaturity as well. And that's something that we don't see as a good thing for the future of the church, for the future of this world. We need, specifically young men, but I would say both ways. Again, we need our young people, teenagers, early 20s, we need them to be emotionally mature and spiritually mature. And from what we're seeing, the experiences that we've had, there's not a lot of that going around.
It's interesting that the word teenager, I think, was coined like in the 50s or something. Before that, you had kids and you had adults. And it's, there was this time of the teenage, I don't know, just culture. And then it's almost shifted back into kids and adults. But we know that kids have to become adults at some point because we have no rites of passage, because we have no expectations, because there's no clarity as to what the line is when you stop being a kid and start being an adult. It very much feels aimless, very much feels like you're on your own to figure this out. And even, hitting 30 years old, it was just kind of like, man, I am an adult. Nobody's ever going to confer that on you, but there is a sense in which that used to be that you did have that conferred on you of responsibility being passed to you and all these things. And you kind of look as a culture, we don't have a sense of passing responsibility down. Look at all the leaders in Congress and the people that run for president. They're all 75 and up. Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, Trump, Biden, all of these people are not passing responsibility on. They're not moving out of the way. They're not, shifting it to the next generation as humans have always done, as we're supposed to do. And so at the bottom of that line, teenagers, those that are coming into adulthood, it's just kind of wait your turn. We're not going to really help you become an adult. You're not going to have a sense of what it means to be an adult. It's this adolescent blur, this gray area, and that has significant problems because we've talked about delayed marriage, we talked about delaying children because you want to go have a good time, and there's that idea out there of your 20s are for you and for travel and all this stuff. And it's like, no, you need to be getting your life in track. As Will said, that, oh, they're just kids. No, they're not, actually. You stop being a kid well before you're 25 years old, but now we still have this mindset of up until 30, and it just keeps getting pushed back, and at some point, we've got to figure out, okay, what is the line? When should you be an adult? When should we expect you to be an adult? And you think about, not to get too far ahead of our outline, because we do have some scriptures to get to, Jesus in the temple at 12 years old. You think about David as a young man. You think about Joseph as a young man. Daniel as a young man. And the way they excelled, Esther probably was a very young woman. I mean, there's plenty of them in the Bible that show you don't have to wait until somebody's in their mid-30s to call them an adult and put responsibility on them. And so you're right. All of these things we're seeing is just this generational thing where there's no in between. Again, it's just this big gray area between 16 and 32 where you're just kind of left to figure it out on your own.
And you
You
see
had
this,
mentioned
Joe. Sorry, you
No, go for it.
referenced adulting, right? That was a big. I think that was really big with the millennials. No offense to both of you who are millennials.
Watch
When they
yourself.
first started going out and doing
It's
all
true,
these
though.
all these things that were very basic, paying bills, going to the DMV,
I
whatever
cooked myself
else.
some ramen. #adulting.
Right, like
grocery
cooking-
shopping and
cooking
didn't just
yourself
buy
dinner.
Little Debbie's. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was a let me get on social media and brag about it and call it adulting. And Jack, I know you've written on that before. That's embarrassing. I don't really know any other way to put it than just flat out embarrassing that we've raised a few generations who paying a bill, going to the grocery store is a big accomplishment. And yes, I do think it is to some extent we need to cast aspersions on those who have not taught them these things. Again, we don't always want to put all the blame on the younger generation because to some extent you've got to be taught these things. But at the same time, there is a general lowering of expectations, and we have hit that really hard several times with young people and specifically with young men. But Joe, I want to ask you, again, you are kind of the one who put a lot of this outline together. Some people might be looking at this and saying, yeah, maybe this is somewhat of a big deal, but not really. What's the big deal here? What are the real problems? What are the real dangers of somebody who, again, maybe they stay in their adolescence a little too long. Yeah, maybe they're a little emotionally immature, but what's really the big deal about that? Why did we decide to devote a full episode to this? What are the problems?
Well, I can answer you from a therapist perspective, to be honest. When you see emotionally stunted adults, it trickles down the generations, and it's horrible, absolutely horrible. But that's been happening for a long time. There's emotionally stunted boomers and everything else. But what I would say is when you take adults out of the room, that leaves a huge vacuum of power, basically. Well, who do you think is filling that? I'd say government. I'd say, there's all sorts of things that when they can keep you being a kid, and when the most basic of things are you stepping up and being an adult, there's no striving for greatness, as we talk about in the gym podcast. There's no conquering the world. Consider Alexander the Great, I think, was younger than me when he conquered the known world. That's mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. But we look at kids today and it's like, man, what have I accomplished? And what have they accomplished at that time? We've taken greatness out of the equation, and it's not thriving, it's surviving. And a lot of people just survive through life. And I would say this is the church's, we just need to make it to heaven. Instead of recognizing, man, we have a lot of good we can do on earth, we kind of push it out, and that's how we focus on just look at the future and it'll be fine, and we survive. We never actually thrive.
Let me ask this too, because I was wondering where to include this in our outline as far as this question that I have. Because I remember my parents were actually asked, specifically about me, don't you think, is Will really enjoying his childhood? It seems like y'all are just pushing him into, adulthood and responsibility just way too fast, and y'all need to slow down and let him enjoy his childhood. Now, I think specifically with me, that wasn't the case. I feel like I enjoyed my childhood fairly well, and I wasn't pushed into it too fast. But I also think maybe there are some ways that you can just absolutely shove your kids head first into adulthood and really skip out on the childhood part. Joe, I'm sure maybe you've seen some of that in your therapy work. And so I guess my question is, again, I didn't really know where to include it, so I'll just go ahead and include it here. Can you go too far in that direction? As far as you raise the expectations so high and you push and push and push and strive for greatness and challenge and challenge and challenge that your kid really doesn't ever enjoy their childhood, and maybe they're stunted in that way. Do you see what I mean? Like we're going to spend most of our time talking about the dangers of extending adolescence, but I do think there might be an argument to be made, and maybe a question that people would have is, can you also go too far in the other direction?
Well, I'll speak to that from a trauma perspective. I do work with clients who basically had their childhood robbed from them, that their parents were, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, having them do things that were way beyond. You see kids where a parent dies and they're told, hey, you're the man of the house, and the kid's like 10. And so he feels this massive weight just dumped on his shoulders, and he basically doesn't have a childhood from that point on because he's too concerned about adult things. What you end up seeing is a lot of those guys, due to their trauma, end up getting into childish things later, whether that be stupid addictions, whether that be just collectibles, whatever it is. And it's their way of like reliving what they lost. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times I'll have them go back and reconnect with their younger self to bring themselves forward and to allow that 10-year-old to just be a 10-year-old. The 10-year-old should not have had to bear the emotional weight of being the man of the house, quote unquote. So can that happen? No doubt. No doubt. And I would say when you lose the childhood, you will regain that in some way, but it ought to be done in a healthy way, but a lot of times we see it where it's an unhealthy way. But I would also, this kind of speaks to, and I don't want to necessarily move into the next point of the outline yet, but it does speak to when you put the emotional weight of environmentalism, of sexuality and gender and such. When you put all of these weights on kids at 5, 6, 7 years old, they're not prepared for this. They have no idea how to handle these situations. And so we are growing them up too soon in a way. We're not allowing kids to be kids. We want to rush them into the adolescent period, and then we have no idea what to do with them. So, and then the adolescence, I think, is a period where you have the ability to kind of step up in a way because you're old enough where maybe you can start driving, maybe you can start doing these things, but you're not old enough to make like wise decisions. And that's where they want you. They want to keep you stuck in that period. So can you lose your childhood? Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, everybody's losing their childhood a little too soon. Can you lose your adolescence? Yeah, but for the most part, I think it's kids that just get stuck in that time period more than anything else. Not necessarily due to trauma, but due to the fact that they're not called to anything better. And when you look at adults, it's like, why would I want to be one? There's a problem with that. But I wanted to go back to, before we move, this is why I didn't want to move on to it yet, because Jack, you had mentioned something interesting. Matter of fact, you shared it with us, and I wanted to discuss this a little bit. That's the idea of rites of passage.
I think this goes well to Will's point of rushing kids too far or whatever else. Rites of passage are your predecessors, your parents, the adults around you, helping you graduate from kid to adult. You realize a kid is not ready to drive the car at 8 years old, and so you don't ask them to do that, but there is a point at which you expect them to do that. And we're at a point where this chart I sent showed that, of getting their first job, getting their driver's license, things like that, like it is declined precipitously. It's going further and further. At 18 years old, kids haven't had a job, haven't had a driver's license, hadn't had responsibility in some way. But the weird thing is, I guarantee most 18-year-olds who haven't had a job, haven't had responsibility, have not had these rites of passage passed on to them. I mean, and you take it even further back as things like shooting a gun and going hunting and, things like that, that by the time you become quote unquote an adult, you'd be fully expected to do. You don't have any of that, but they've been into porn for 10 years at that point. They've had their own cell phone for 10 years at that point. They've, had their Xbox Live account and been on video games for literally thousands of hours at that point. And so it was all the things you're saying. They're being exposed to things they really can't handle and not being trained into things that they should be handling and growing into responsibility and all these things. And so to Will's question about rushing kids into adulthood, that's the beauty of rites of passage, is it kind of gives a kid a roadmap toward, and the adults a roadmap of, are they ready for this? What should we expect of them at what ages? And when you have that not happening, we've got multiple generations at this point. Probably most people under 50 haven't had those rites of passage. And so you start seeing things like that. They diminish in importance. Well, I don't need to drive. I don't need to go get a job. I don't need this. I don't need that. I don't need to take on any responsibility. That's damaging. That's not good. And you look at the mental health effects that come out of things like this. It's not a positive development. The kids don't know the roadmap to adulthood.
Well, and we see that translated into the church as well. It's not just in everyday life with jobs and with all the things you just referenced, Jack. It's also in the church. We don't have a gradual, call it a progression process for, hey, what is your role as a young person in the church? Well, for most people, it's show up to youth group events and Bible class, and that's literally what it is from age 10 to age really 18. For 8 years, that's their entire level of responsibility. There is no rite of passage. There's no level of progress as, hey, you're a young man, why don't you lead a prayer at age 12? Hey, why don't you step up and do this and that? You're a young lady, step up and do. We don't have any expectations there. I think those two things are very obviously correlated. That, yes, in everyday life, things like getting your driver's license, all the things you just talked about, we don't have those. And I think that also very much correlates to and translates to No wonder why we've got spiritually immature young people as well who get out of college, they come back to their congregation, and they're still at the same level of Bible knowledge and church involvement and church activity that they were when they were 10, 11, 12.
I want to move into kind of our next point with this, and that is, because you're already speaking a little bit to it, Will, but why is this happening? Why are we struggling with, and I guess I don't want to get into the history of like, when did it start happening, though I would say it has absolutely started more in our life, in my lifetime, where we're starting to see this, and maybe the late 90s into the early 2000s, but it's especially the case now. But why is this happening? Why are we extending adolescence and struggling to move into adulthood? Yeah, the rites of passage, that's certainly a part of it. But I'll open it up, and Jack, I'll actually send this to you to get us into our first one. Why is it happening?
I think there's motivation from both sides. Again, the not wanting to give up control, responsibility, whatever else, and so not passing the baton. But then there's so much comfort in not taking the baton, right? Life is just easier that way. You don't have the responsibility. And so, rather, with the rites of passage, again, not to harp on that too much, but it's telling a kid, hey, there's some privileges that come with responsibility that you have to earn. What we have now is people who want the privileges, but not the responsibility. And that is a really big problem of, using pornography and the sexualization of young kids and all that. You want the privilege of sexuality and pleasure and all those things, but none of the responsibility of marriage and respect and all the things that go with that. And so,
and the kids that
problems.
result.
Yeah, the results of them, the children. And so you've got that. You've got, just church stuff of, you want the privileges of coming and getting what you want out of it, but not the responsibility of any expectations placed on you whatsoever. That's something we've run into heavily, and we did an episode on recently of, you start giving expectations and saying, hey, the church should teach such and such. No. Just teach people to be nice. No, there's expectations of you. And so again, you want the privileges of feeling good, like you have a relationship with God and you're going to go to heaven when you die, but don't give me any of the responsibility of expecting me to be holy. And so the why is there's great motivation from both sides. It's so much easier to not train an apprentice and hang on to the job as long as you want because of all the privileges you draw from it. And so you're not passing it on. You're not replacing yourself. And when you look at the concept of discipleship and the Great Commission and all that, Jesus was saying, I'm not here. I'm going to choose disciples, choose apostles to train, because I'm only going to be here for 3 years. And then they're going to go train other people. And it's the same thing Paul says in 2 Timothy 2:2. Timothy, I trained you. You go find faithful men who can train others. There's this cycle of Paul saying, look, I'm not going to be here forever. Timothy, when I'm not here, it's your job. When you're not here, Timothy, it's their job. And so this cycle that's supposed to happen, it would have been so much easier for Paul to consolidate power unto himself and make himself irreplaceable. But what happens to the church if Paul dies and he didn't ever train anybody? That's a big problem. But boy, Paul could pat himself on the back and say, wow, look how important I am. There's got to be humility to pass on. And so from the upper generations, there's that side of it. From the younger generations, there has to be that desire for responsibility that says, it's easier to let Paul do everything for me, but I'm going to have to step up and do some stuff myself too. I'm going to have to take this job because he's not always going to be here.
There's that cliche saying, well, I taught them everything they know, but not everything I know. And I always bristled at that because I felt like that was incredibly arrogant. And it speaks to exactly what you're talking about is like, yeah, I held a few things back for myself, specifically when we're talking about the church. And, I don't think Paul was or Peter, whoever would have been somebody that used that saying. But I want to transition into the next thing we were talking about as far as why is this happening. Guys, there seems to be the way we're putting it is a war on childhood these days. You think about 15 years ago, what animated kids movies were like, maybe even 15, 20 years ago. They were for kids, right? It was so that kids could have something to watch and enjoy. Now you look at the Pixar, animated kids movies now. What are they trying to accomplish? Their objectives are very different. 15, 20 years ago, again, it was let's make a product that is going to entertain kids and really let kids have fun watching. Now the objective is let's have something that kids can stare at a screen and be somewhat entertained by, but let's also appeal to the adults. Let's also appeal to the parents who are going to be taking them. And so what you get is the sexual innuendo jokes, the wink wink type of jokes in your animated movies. You've got some animated movies that are introducing slang, cussing, essentially. Even Joe, one of your favorites, Inside Out, fantastic movie. That's not a movie for kids. That
No,
is
it's
an
not.
animated movie that is certainly for adults. And so really we've kind of taken things that used to previously be for kids and made them and told them like, yeah, this really isn't for you anymore either. This, you can be entertained by it, but it's really for your parents. It's really for adults. And so all these, again, this childhood wonder that kids used to experience with TV and with movies, it's all gone essentially.
Well, think about the whimsy that comes with, and I think we've talked on this before, but like look at McDonald's for us growing up. Bright colors, bright red, bright yellow, of course. You look at Burger King and they had the Hamburglar, this bright purple thing, and it's for kids, man. It was fun. It was a good time, and you'd go there and you get your picture of the Ronald McDonald on the bench. As weird as that may have been, like it, you get your
The
statue.
the Hamburglar was McDonald's. We want to be factually accurate on this.
Oh,
podcast.
was it McDonald's? Oh, there you go. Oh, against Ronald McDonald. There you go.
But like Happy Meals and things as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
but Happy Meals. Well, now consider the Happy Meals as we talked about for adults and things like that. But there was this push for like, I don't know, the whimsy. And I look at the '90s TV shows and the Nickelodeon and the Green Slime, and yeah, we can go down the nostalgic rabbit hole. But the thing is, it was for kids. All of the commercials on a Nickelodeon TV break were for kids. Look at the average McDonald's now. It's this swanky coffee bar, black and gray and natural woods, that's trying to look like, it's
A hotel lobby or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Crate and Barrel or something. It's like, this is ridiculous. And they've lost the whimsy. But you see this, once you start seeing it, I'm telling you, you will never stop seeing it. All the things that as kids, it was a ton of fun, and now it's not. And you alluded to the movies, Will. What heroes do we have now? They literally ruined Superman, who was perfect, he was great. He stood for truth, justice, and the American way. He was the pinnacle of what we wanted to grow up to be, and every kid wanted to be Superman. And now we've, as I was saying, we've turned him into, I guess off air we were talking about it, we've turned him into a fornicating loser who is, sleeping with Lois Lane, and he's having his fun and all of this stuff. And it's like, why can't he just be the man that we need him to be? He's got to be this conflicted hero who's everybody's conflicted, quote unquote. So there's no heroes for kids to look up to either in adulthood and go, that's who I want to be. I want to be just like Roy Rogers. I want to be John Wayne. I mean, that's a man right there. We don't have any of those. We have the Iron Man, who's half good, half bad. Is he a playboy, or is he or is he a good guy? Well, he's both. So there is no real good person to look up to. Does it make for a better story to have conflicted heroes? Sure. But what are we teaching our kids? There's this war on childhood where we want to get them into, as you alluded to, Will, we want to get them into adolescence as quickly as possible. We've turned every PG movie into PG-13, adding a little edginess to make sure that we can hook the kids, because it's got to be important for the teenagers. Why?
And like you're saying, introduce the environmental concerns, the cultural concerns
Absolutely.
to 7-year-olds.
Absolutely. We've lost all of childhood, in my opinion. And so when we're teaching our kids about sexuality, when we're teaching them about race relations, critical race theory, things like that, environmentalism, instead of letting them play, we're ruining childhood. And this isn't even to bring up abortion, the fact that these, the people that are pushing this are pushing abortion more than ever. So childhood is clearly we're at war against childhood, I would say, as a culture, but we also are against actual adulthood, I would say, as well.
Yeah, there is a war on adulthood. With things like just being a strong, capable adult, going back to the adulting thing, capable, competent, like that's baseline bare minimum is considered an accomplishment, but that also goes with the intersectionality thing of the race to the bottom, victimhood, oppression, and so like, intersectionality again is where you start layering a social hierarchy. Well, men are higher on the hierarchy than women, and whites are at the top of the hierarchy, not white supremacy, but like they are the most privileged, right? And so you go down the privilege list from there. Straight people are the most privileged, and all of this. So what you need to do is get yourself into a minority category so that you don't have as much privilege. Or if you just can't do that, you've got to be an ally to LGBT, ally to BLM, ally to this, that, and the other thing. And the apologetic self-hating straight white male kind of thing that you see a lot is, I can't be a strong, competent adult. I have to show all the ways in which I'm weak, all the ways in which, because weakness is power. The idea of, we've had this before, oh, straight white men on a podcast, like, yeah, we can say the truth because the truth is the truth. Like, we don't have to apologize for who we are. But there's this idea that you do need to apologize for who you are if you are a certain ranking on the social privilege hierarchy. And so that just teaches people, try and climb to the bottom. Don't try and climb to the top. To be a leader, to be somebody who can bless other people by your competence and by your ability and your skill and all that. We're going to do an eldership episode at some point. I've been writing on this a lot of, like, we need a Christian elite. You look at the qualifications for elders, those are people who are unapologetically trying to be their best, because God needs men being their best. God needs men trying to be like Christ and leading the way. People that can say, like Paul did, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But when you're constantly beating yourself up, and brokenness culture we've talked about a lot as well, oh, I'm just a broken sinner. Don't be. But like, you feel like you're supposed to say that there's like a moral authority to saying I'm a loser, rather than I'm going to be competent, I'm going to be strong.
But Jack, it's humble.
Right.
It's humility.
Yeah, I mean, that's how that's portrayed, right? Rather than Paul saying, "Look, I'm following Christ. I'm living this honestly as best I can. I'm going to try and set the example for you to follow." That's what a leader is. That's why we don't have any leaders, because nobody takes responsibility. Nobody's trying to be great. Everyone's trying to find a way that they can point out to be like, no, I'm way worse than you because that makes me more important than you. It's this inverted narcissism thing. It's so weird.
Well, in our culture today, it is the leaders, like you said, the people who are on top of the quote unquote hierarchy privilege pyramid, that it's heavily frowned upon. Stones are thrown at them, metaphorically, repeatedly. And so if you're a young person, you're looking at that going, well, why would I want to, do that? Why would I want to be that person? That type of person is ostracized. Again, that type of person is just scolded constantly and shouted down constantly. I mean, it kind of makes sense why young people are not wanting to strive for those things. It's a whole lot more comfortable and a whole lot more peaceful for them to be lower on that quote unquote, again, privilege pyramid, to play the oppression card, the victim card. Again, the way that culture has set this up to where those at the top are constantly, taxed and ostracized and all these things. Why would our young people want to strive for those things?
And you consider Jack, as you talked about, taking responsibility. That's a big part of adulthood. Probably the biggest part of adulthood is being responsible. Notice what the government and other people are doing. You're not going to own anything and you're going to like that's World Economic Forum. You're not going to own anything. You're going to love it. It's going to be great. We're going to have you rent basically from us, right? And so the idea of taking responsibility in your own life, financial stability, it might be healthy living, making sure that you're eating healthy foods. No, they want you to eat bugs. They want you to eat crazy things. This isn't conspiracy. Look up Bill Gates, man. I mean, there's ridiculous amounts of things going on around the world as you pay attention to. They don't want you to take responsibility. They don't want you to be a functioning adult who knows, as they might say, red-pilled, right? Who knows what's going on and who's able to be self-sufficient and who has a lot of money in the bank account, because you can't be ruled in that way. And so, of course, there is a war on the actual adulthood. And the worst thing, again, is, we're talking from a societal perspective. This stuff leaks into the church, which is why we have no elders, because nobody wants to take responsibility. But with responsibility comes privileges. With responsibility comes a level of glory, a level of
honor.
The good.
It says double honor to those who rule well.
Right.
I'm going to add on to your thing about, you talk about government dependence. One of the other things is this world we live in of influencers. And, we hold up these influencers. Well, why do they have influence? These are idiots. These are teenage people. These are but we're supposed to look to the influencers to tell us what's cool, what matters, what to care about, all of these things. And it's just I don't need to be influenced. I've got enough going on in my life. I've got stuff that I should care about. But why are influencers successful? Why do people feel like they need influencers? Because they're stuck in adolescence. They're still looking for a parent authority figure to tell them, here's how you belong. And you saw that with COVID stuff. Here's what the good people do. Put out your signal, put out your profile picture on Facebook to say, I'm one of the good people. I didn't even care if you did a lot of the things that they called you to do. But why do you got to tell everybody you're doing it? Because you're looking for social approval. Because, the influencers are telling you to do this. The government's telling you to do this. And it's like, this is the problem of this stuff, is you can be driven, as the Bible says, tossed back and forth by every wind and wave because you have no grounding, because you have not developed your own competency and strength and a confidence in who you are in Christ, that you got to look to somebody else for that approval. You got to look for that pat on the head.
But let's just call it as we see it. It's because parents didn't do their job. Let's just say
because you didn't have
parents,
again, the rites of passage, the point at which somebody looked and said, you're an adult, you are on your own, you're competent, you're all these things. Between high school, college, everything else, you just got stuck.
So I think that's very well said, and we could go forever on these 2 points, the war on childhood and the war on adulthood. But I want to continue under this overall heading of why is this happening? Why is adolescence being extended? And we're seeing these emotionally and spiritually immature young people, again, into their 20s. And I was asking the guys, we were all talking about it, Joe put the outline together, but we were throwing some things around as far as, there's a theoretical war on childhood, there's a theoretical war on adulthood and all these things. What are the tangible things? What are the things that we're seeing? What are the things that young people are doing that they're actively involved in that are contributing to this idea, that are contributing to this concept of extending adolescence? And there's two big ones that I want to talk about here, or that we're going to start with and then get to some of the smaller things. And the first one is youth groups. And before anybody stops listening, hear me out. I used to work with young people. I was a quote-unquote youth evangelist. Youth groups are not something that I have ever been entirely opposed to, but I think I would also be foolish to say that to some extent this does not contribute to this problem that we're seeing. You think about, again, what I alluded to earlier about how from 10 to 18, young people in the church basically have the same expectations for that entire time period. Show up to Bible class, hit a youth group function, show up to worship. That's it. That's all that we expect of them. Again, generalizing here. But I think we would be foolish to say that youth groups have not contributed to that. I feel like I don't need to add in all the qualifiers about, yes, there are some congregations that do youth groups very well. There are some youth ministers that understand that they need to raise expectations. This is a general principle. But I've seen and I've experienced and I've met a lot of different people and a lot of different youth ministers and youth groups. And I'm telling you, and you guys I'm sure can back me up, the general premise of youth groups is let's just have fun. Let's keep these kids in an emotionally immature state, not calling them to higher things, not teaching them anything deeper than peer pressure for 4 years in high school classes, never getting deep into text. And so I think this is a huge contributing factor as to why, again, specifically in the church, we've got these 21, 22, 23-year-olds who their Bible knowledge is that of a 12-year-old. Their emotional immaturity is that of a 12-year-old. Again, I'm not anti-youth group completely, but I think we would be foolish to say that this does not contribute to it. What do you guys have to add to that?
Yeah, I'm pretty close to it, to being anti-youth group, and here's why. You have non-Christians, Christians, and youth. It has created a third structure in the church that does not need to exist. If you're baptized, why are you in the youth group? You need to be discipled and pulled along by the adults. You need to be put into adult, Bible classes. Well, you can't understand. You'll get there. It's putting a kid in an AP class. Well, my poor kid can't understand. The kids that we push to do a little better usually do a little better. And if you're not a Christian, you don't need to be in the youth group mixing with the Christians. You need to be evangelized. If you're in your youth, you need to be evangelized. And it's this comfortable, little ecosystem where you don't really have to engage with the rest of the church. You don't have to step up. You don't have to do anything else. But if you're not a Christian, that's okay too. You can still show up and play laser tag and eat pizza. You can still do all these things. You can enjoy the devos. Well, which is it? Are you a Christian or are you not? If you're a Christian, get busy. Get busy doing the work of the Lord. Get busy being discipled by the adults. But instead, we're being discipled by youth ministers who, if we're going to be honest, there's so many horror stories. We just heard of another horror story recently in the Church of Christ of sexual issues taking place in youth group. Why? Because you've extended the adolescence. This kind of moves us into the next one in the outline, but they went to college for a while and they came back. They're not full adults themselves. And then what do they want to do? well, let's just have fun with the kids in the youth group. I feel like I'm a kid too, and so I can do it. It's like, that's the problem. We have a bunch of youth ministers that are kids. We have a bunch of youth ministers that never left the youth group. Like, you can't have, it's Lord of the Flies around here. You can't have kids leading kids. You have to have an adult. And when the adult does it well, what's the point of the youth group? If you have an adult who's willing to disciple kids, have them disciple kids. And we ought to have multiple adults ready and willing to do it. And so I look at youth group as nothing but a way to extend adolescence, where you're, again, you're neither called on to lead or called on to be baptized.
And the evidence points to that. It really does. Again, we had a youth ministry episode way back last year, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the things we brought up is like, look, it's not working. At least it's not contributing to kids staying faithful. It's not really, in a general sense, contributing to kids being more spiritually mature. The evidence points to exactly what Joe's talking about. And to add on to your college point real quick before I hand it back to Jack, because that was another thing that we had on here is college. You think about the people that choose to go to college who, and again, that's a 4-year thing. A lot of them choose not to get jobs. And so you take somebody who graduates high school, maybe they take online classes, but they're working all throughout, making money. Again, maybe they're still in school, they're taking online classes, they're maybe in trade school, doing whatever. And then you compare that individual at 22 to the one who was in college for 4 years with no job, social clubs, having fun, doing whatever. Again, college, you get 15 hours a week in class, and that leaves you with about 140 left. So again, I don't think we should be surprised if somebody goes to college, does not work through college, and just goes there to kind of have fun, and then graduates and comes out a whole lot less emotionally and spiritually mature than the person who, again, maybe they went to a closer community college, or maybe they went to a stateside college where they didn't have to stay there, but they worked, they were able to have that level of responsibility. It should be common sense for us there, but we've got so many people that are just pushing them to college and pushing them, hey, you need to go have the college experience. Well, what is the college experience? Having fun for another 4 years till you hit 22. And so I think college, again, just like youth groups, can be a significant contributing factor to this problem. But Jack, what else do you have to add to that one?
I think both of these perfectly illustrate what we're talking about, because you might have somebody listening like, why is this a big deal? I don't think it's as bad as you think. I think, kids have always been kids. People will say things like that. The point of the youth group, which again is a modern invention, very modern, very last 50 years or so kind of invention, is that separation of a separate class of Christian like Joe talked about, because we don't know what to do with them. And so we're going to kind of keep them in this, we'll cater specifically to you at your specific age. You don't have a biblical case for it, but you also, as you said, we have the results that show this is not helping them grow. And then the college thing, you look back, and I mean, you see this on movies and stuff, but culturally, this is how it was. The college was for very specific people to go learn very specific skills for very specific jobs, and it was the kind of thing that you could pay off your debt by working in the summer. Now it's $100,000 worth of debt. You go without even needing to know what you're going for, other than the experience, as Will said, and finding yourself and making friends and all those things, rather than getting started on your life. And again, you come out with all this debt. You don't know what you want to be. You don't know. You kind of choose a generic major and hope you can find a job for it, because there wasn't any specific skill that the degree required. And so, yeah, the change in focus of what college started as and what it is now shows exactly the kind of problem we're talking about. Is it was there with an expectation that you're going to go strengthen yourself for adulthood. Now it's you're going to remain a child, and we're going to have a haven set up for you to have a greater flexibility. You're out from your parents' house, you have a little bit of money, whatever else, but the responsibility's still not coming through. So I think those two, as I said, encapsulate everything we're talking about. Of look at how those have shifted, look at what those have introduced, if you're not convinced by the concept we are pushing on this episode. And of course, I mean, we got to get through some of this quicker, or else we're going to be here 3 hours today. There's a lot to go on here, but we've mentioned low expectations. We've mentioned the kind of things that kids are turning to instead. Video games, social media, porn. I mean, they're like all of the things that occupy our time that kids are giving their lives to, versus building skills, building relationships, building a career, building a home, searching for a relationship and things like that. We talked about the rites of passage, the dating thing, and we had a dating courtship episode, all that of how it should be approached. But like, that is getting pushed back, where kids aren't even seeking a relationship until they're, out of high school and moving on, and just kind of
hang on.
hoping
They're
it happens.
seeking a physical for fun relationship, but not an actual real potential marriage relationship.
It's funny. They will seek that, but the statistics are going the other direction of like sexual activity among kids, which we think is a good thing, but it's not because they've developed virtue. It's because they're watching it on their phone rather than going and participating in it. And so it's like neither one of those are things that we should be, endorsing either one. We don't want them doing either of those things. But the idea of I've got to get myself to a place where I can be ready for marriage so I can pursue that, it's just not even on the radar. And so no skill building, no career building, no life building starts to take place until, I don't know, you look around at 30 years old and go, I guess I'm supposed to do something.
Well, you mentioned the video games and all of those things that are kind of taking place. And what are those taking the place of? Reading, traveling, exploring, cooking, driving. There was a time where, and as you referenced earlier with that chart, the getting your driver's license has just dropped off a cliff. Like kids just aren't doing it these days. That used to represent freedom. That used to represent like, man, again, it's kind of a rite of passage. Like I'm ready to be out on my own. And that's why there was so much push to, click it or ticket, all those things. Because you have a lot of young kids that are dumb and they don't always wear their seatbelt. I don't hardly see those, and I don't watch a ton of TV, but I don't hardly see those these days. All these PSA announcements about kids being safe. Kids aren't driving. So all of the things that kids used to do, they just go out and explore. And look, not all that was healthy too. They'd go down to the train tracks and smoke cigarettes and such. Look, I'm not saying all of that's great, but there was an aspect of they were trying to be adults. They were trying to grow up too fast, and that was the problem, right? Well, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't do all that. That's hardly happening these days. Now you have kids that just want to be furries and, again, play with their AI chatbot. Like, we're not adults. And the other aspect, as we're talking about this, I think adults themselves, and I don't want to spend too long because we've talked a little bit about this, I don't think adults themselves know how to be adults either. They didn't know how to raise the next generation. The parents don't. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of taking a baseball bat to the parents on this one. We're going to have an entire parenting episode. I think 2 of them we've structured out, or we've planned out coming up here in the next little while. But I do blame the parents a lot of times because they didn't model for their kids why it was good to be an adult. And they themselves, a lot of times, in my opinion, don't know what it's like to be an adult. And by that, I mean taking responsibility and relishing the responsibility. Everything's done with this negative, sour attitude of like, I have to do this and I have to do that.
I hate Mondays.
Instead of recognizing, right, Mondays, it's hump day. I mean, all of those things seem perfectly fine. They seem normal. But what's really behind it? It's this frustration with life. I'm so sick of life and I'm so sick of doing this. So you have a teenager, 15, 16
It makes adulthood unappealing.
Exactly. He sees the way that you are interacting. It's another Monday. I'm just living for the weekend. And he goes, this is what I want? Like, this is what I grow up to be? How stinking depressing. Like, no wonder why that's so difficult for kids to really want it is because they look at their parents and the other adults and they aren't enjoying it. So why should they grow up?
So, Joe, I'm going to use that to kind of springboard us into the last section that we have, which is what can we do? We don't want to be people that just present, here's all the problems and here's why this is bad. And then, all right, we'll see you guys next week. No, we want to ask the question, what can we do? What can we do? And I think that's one of the first things, Joe, is, hey, if you're an adult and you are looking around going, man, all these kids that aren't growing up, maybe examine yourself and ask yourself, are you part of the reason why kids are not wanting to move into adulthood? Are you somebody who gets on social media and just, oh my goodness, another work week and man, can't wait for Friday? And again, you might think that that's harmless. You need to show specifically your kids, but obviously the next generation, why the privileges, as we've spoken of adulthood, are so worth it. Why, yes, there are tiring days. Yes, it is taxing. Yes, it is difficult. But man, it's so worth it to have your own family. It's so worth it to have your own kids and your own spouse and your own level of responsibility. Again, if we make it this level of unappealing to young people, that I don't think we should be surprised when they want to push that off as long as they possibly can. So that'd be the first thing. Want to get to some scripture. I'll hit the first one as far as what does the Bible say about this? I think we certainly don't see youth groups in the church, or in the Bible. We don't see the word teenager. We don't really see much of the word adolescent anywhere. What we do see is in places like 1 Kings chapter 2, when David is about to die. What does he say Solomon? Or what does he tell Solomon? It says he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man. Prove yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments. David's literally, as he's dying, his charge to his son is not go be as successful as you can be, go have your fun, go find yourself. No, it's prove yourself a man. I'm passing the baton to you. Take it and run with it. I think we got to have a lot more of that, specifically fathers to sons, but obviously more broadly, one generation to the next generation needs to be able to do that. No, prove yourself in this manner. Have these measurable, tangible things that we can say, no, this is what you're going to do to prove yourself a man, to prove yourself an adult. Hand it off to one of you guys. What else do we have on here?
Well, it's so funny that, you think if somebody told their sons that today, of, you know what, or just post that on social media, I want my son to be strong and prove himself a man, people would legitimately take issue with it. Well, that sounds like toxic masculinity. Well, be strong. Well, we need men to be sensitive. We need men to be... But you can just say, be strong, prove yourself a man. In fact, it's weird that, the only people who are allowed to be strong are little girls at this point, She's a strong girl. Well, we need strong young men, too. We need them to be able to prove themselves a man. And so this is part of the good that we can do, is do these things. Step up. Be courageous, as Joshua was told in Joshua 1. Be strong and of good courage. I mean, strength and virtue and all of these things are good, that you can look into adulthood as not of... Well, I've got to go work a job so I can pay money, so I can have my video game subscription and my Netflix subscription, and have those creature comforts that get me through my nights and weekends, so that I can, get some kind of enjoyment out of life. No, have this vitality, this sense of adventure, this sense of accomplishment. That what strength is for is that I can provide for a wife and kids, or if you're a woman, that I can raise up this family and create this wonderful home that is a great place for my family and anybody else who comes to visit. And this is the kind of thing I'm living for, to be a contributing member of my church, to be a light in my community, to be just take something up. I mean, there's Proverbs we can get into. There's different things. I don't know which one of these you want to jump into, Joe, because there's so much scripture on this.
I'd move past the Proverbs for time's sake, because we could spend so much time there. I look at the pastoral epistles, and you look at 1 Timothy 4:12, I believe. Let no one look down on your youthfulness. And you go, okay, well, see, there's the youthfulness. Yeah, but right after that, he tells them how to conduct himself, to be a leader in the congregation. Basically, don't give them a reason to make them think that you're a mere kid who is an idiot. You make sure you treat people well. You treat the young women well. You treat the young men well. You treat the older and older women and men well, and with honor and with respect that they deserve. And so, Timothy, you make sure you pick up the mantle, and take it in being the person you're supposed to be. And what that is expectation. Paul places expectation on Timothy and Titus. We're assuming Titus is a younger man. We're not really sure. We know Timothy is. He places expectation. That's what I would say for us is parents, grandparents, elders, preachers. We need to be expecting a lot more of kids and youth ministers. I realize we're speaking to some youth ministers, and everybody knows I don't like youth ministry. I don't like VBS either. I guess I'm against kids. I don't know. But
Joe, you're just anti-fun.
I basically am anti-fun. No fun at all. Just trudge through life, I meant to say. But if you are a youth minister, anybody in position of leadership, please start expecting things of kids. Stop with the 5-minute devos. Let me tell you about the flood and Joshua and all the cool things. Yeah, let's dig into the meat of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. What are they about to do, right? We dig into the meat of Scripture. One of the things that when I was teaching, I was not a youth minister, but I did teach a youth class. Man, we covered BLM. We covered transgenderism. We covered all sorts of things. We exegeted through the entire book of Galatians and pulled out the Judaizers and Paul saying, I wish they'd mutilate themselves. I mean, we got into the depth. Why? Because I expect something of these kids. Because I thought they can handle it. They're perfectly fine. If they're hearing twice this at public school. So why would we not dig into these things? We coddle our kids and then we wonder why they can't grow up into full functioning adults. We have to start expecting more. That's what I would say, kind of to piggyback on the Scripture idea.
and that would be, I would say, probably the banner one that we want you to remember and take from this, is just start expecting more. And we've hit on that before, but it's so important to, again, I think one of you guys said it already. When you expect more and you raise the bar, we just tend to think that kids are just going to fold and that they just can't handle it. 9 times out of 10, that's not true. You raise the bar for them, and they're going to reach for it. They're going to hit it. Is it always going to be pretty and smooth? Not necessarily, but you raise the bar, you make things more challenging. Kids are not just going to fold. Kids are far more capable than we give them credit for, specifically with the Bible, but also just in simple things like academics or these tough, maybe quote-unquote adult things. Man, raise the bar for them. They're not just going to fold. Joe, you had a comment?
Yeah, let me just say this real fast on the expectations, because you referenced this earlier. How do we know when we're expecting too much of our kids? Most of the time when that's the case, you're expecting them for your sake. You're living vicariously through your kids, or you're worried about how they make you look. This is all about the kid. This is about launching them into adulthood, launching them into life as warriors for Christ. And when you're thinking about it from their perspective, you say, what do they need? And what expectations should I place on them for their sake? Not so they make the family look good, not so that they, not so that I can live vicariously through their kids. Those are the ones that burn out their kids, where the expectations are so high that nobody can hit them. Don't burn out your kids. Do it for their sake and understand. So that's one thing I'd say to the expectation.
The next thing I'll say, and then I'll hand it back to Jack, as far as youth groups and college thing, look, we know not everybody's going to agree with us on that. We would pretty heavily discourage both of those things, specifically for the experience thing. How many times have you heard somebody talk about college? Man, I just want to go enjoy the college experience. If that is your reason for going to college, that is a terrible reason. That needs to be the last reason for you going to college. We're not anti-college. I mean, there are very good reasons to go. Again, as Jack talking about specific things that, look, if you got a field that you're trying to go in, that they're going to look for that college degree. We're not completely, that's something that you might need, but it certainly does not need to be, again, the main reason being, well, I really just want to go have fun for 4 years. I really want to delay my adulthood for 4 years and go get on in all these social clubs and just, man, that's just the experience that I want to have. That's not a good thing. And really the same thing for the youth group. If it's just one of those things where you want your kids to be babysat or just, I really want to make sure that they have fun with their friends, there's a time and a place for that. If that's the entirety of their Christianity, if that's the entirety of their faith and their church going, that is a real big problem. And again, we should not be surprised if that is the extent of their Christianity when they are emotionally and spiritually immature at 21, at 22, at 23. So that's all I'll say on that. There's a few other things, Jack. I'll let you hit those.
Yeah, I don't know. We have on this show Why It's Great to Be an Adult. This is something that you look at the world around us and how much negativity, how much, of that adulting Mondays, I hate this, hate that, oh, work is the worst, and all these things that people, blaming every problem on somebody else, and all of this kind of comes down to the same central problem of no enthusiasm for life, no love for life, no appreciation for life. And so getting stuck in adolescence and just wanting that youthful, chasing your childhood thing. And I mean, people are spending money on this. When we did our Kidults Think Fast, which you can find on YouTube, I mean, the toy companies are saying, look, we're making so much money off of millennials right now. We're having to cater to them because of how much they're buying their childhood toys and nostalgic toys, and McDonald's bringing back the Happy Meal toys of the adult Happy Meal with 90s toys in it. I hang on to my childhood. But Paul said, when I was a child, I had childish things, but when I became a man, I put those things away. Like, it's time to move on. It's time to move forward. And boy, did I get people mad at me for saying, stop spending all your money on toys. It's okay to enjoy some things here and there, but if all of your enjoyment in life is in the past, what does that tell the people around us? But when we have everybody around us that is trying to hold on nostalgically to their past, and that's where their enjoyment is from, that's what they're living for. Again, they're living for their Netflix show, they're living for their video game, they're living for these just tiny bites of a little bit of pleasure here and there. Man, this is a Christian value to show a love for life, a joy. I mean, joy is one of the fruit of the Spirit. The ability to just really attack life, really take life by the horns and be like, you know what, God put me here. This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. I will gladly take on responsibility. I will gladly come into my own as somebody who can care for myself, be responsible for myself, and then care for others. And so again, in a world where this is so rapidly decreasing, you know how much of an example you can set by just being somebody who is enthusiastic and positive and joyful and responsible and competent and all of these things. This isn't just for young people. This is not just, hey, this episode only counts if you're 15 to 20 years old. There's a lot of people 40, 50, 60 years old who could really change their approach, who could really look at it and go, you know what kind of example am I setting? And am I stuck in the past? Because it's never too late. It's never, while you're still alive, you can still grow into being who God wants you to be. And this is such a huge part of it.
Just a personal plea here, because Jack, that's very well said. Please stop on social media bragging about talking to somebody on the phone or going to the bank or all the things we talked about. That is a guaranteed just unfollow you for me on Facebook. Again, just if you are somebody, it's very, if you're bragging about, hey, I talked to somebody on the phone for 4 minutes today, just a little sidebar there, sorry.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the intersectionality thing of, I'm a loser. I'm one
Right.
of, see guys, I'm a loser too. We're all losers. Stop being a loser. Stop making being a loser the cool thing to do. How about let's set the example of, like, it is this baseline competence thing is not something I even have to worry about anymore because I handle my business.
We talked about being worthy of double honor. There is I think we use humility in so many wrong ways. It's okay to have honor. It's okay to have respect. It's okay to have
confidence.
People look at, yes, to have confidence and for people to look up to you and go, wow, that's incredible. And you go, yeah, it is. It is. Not in an arrogant way, but to say, I've worked hard for this, and by the grace of God, He has given me the ability to maybe be good at something or to be put in this position, imitate me as I'm like Christ. That is because of our false humility. We take all of the good parts, the privileges of responsibility that we talked about, of adulthood, and we've made them disappear because that would be arrogance. That's not arrogance. That's the ability to just recognize God's goodness in your life and to be grateful for it. And Jack, what you were talking about, even when you don't have good days, even when you don't have this vitality for life, be grateful for what you have. I don't always have good days. I come home and I talk to my 4-year-old about, this is what men do. You know, we still go to work even when it's difficult. I'm really grateful to have a job. Like, you go, wow, you burden your 4-year-old with that? No, I want him to realize work is really good. And you know what? He started picking up the house. He started helping my wife. Can you give me some work to do? And he just goes and has a ton of fun, and we give him a little spray bottle, and he goes around. Like, that's cool, man. That's cool, because we want him to associate. That's a blessing from God. So even when things are good, just be grateful for what we have. And that's a big part of adulthood, I think, is the gratefulness to recognize, man, it's good to have responsibility. It's good to be a man. It's good to be an adult. And we hope that this has challenged you guys in that way to recognize it is good for that, and maybe have your kids, if you have grandkids, have them step up. So, fellas, is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
I'm just looking forward to Jack's.
I think one thing we just don't. You look forward to my what now?
I was looking forward to your next book called "Stop Being a Loser." I think that's going to be great.
Stop being a loser. That's the title. There it is. One thing we don't talk about enough on the podcast sometimes is Jesus himself. Jesus took responsibility. Jesus showed up here to work. Jesus, I mean, like, if you talk about wanting to be like Jesus, the idea of Jesus, kid-adulting in the garden at 33 years old, I don't want to. No, he said, let this cup pass from me, but if not, it's not my will, but your will be done. That obedience, that competence, that responsibility, the strength, the character, the
Jesus
virtue,
was
all
learning
of that.
from the Old Testament experts on the law at age 12. I don't think he was stuck in his perpetual adolescence.
And astounding them at that age.
Yeah, and so you want to be like Jesus? This is a big part of it, okay? And so I think that is just such a blessing that he set that example for us of faithful in all things. Be that person. It's good to be that person. It is somebody to strive to be in our lives as well. And so, yeah, I wanted to bring him in because it's such a perfect example of everything we want to be is who he was. So we're going to close right there. We will be back with another episode next week. Again, if you're in Nashville, Lads to Leaders this weekend, come say hello. We'll be easy to find. Big old Focus Press table. I'll be the good-looking one. Will will be next to me. Joe will be a little bit further down.
Watch
I don't
yourself.
want to sit next to him.
I was going to say, is Jack's next book a memoirs?
What's that? Oh, don't stop being a
Stop
loser.
being a loser.
Wow.
Ouch.
Wow.
Little zinger
Ouch.
to end the
Hey,
show.
I wasn't going
Goodness.
to do it until you,
We're taking shots back and forth here. Will is avoiding the crossfire so far. We'll have to get out of here before anybody gets hurt too bad. So we'll talk to you guys next week.